Some new information now on a legal story we've been following closely on Happening Now. The judge is granting a hearing for new evidence in a case highlighted on the very popular public radio podcast, Serial. That show's podcast downloaded about 100 million times already. Back in 2000, Adnan Syed, on the left, was convicted in the murder of his high school girlfriend, Hae Min Lee. He received a life sentence, but now 15 years later, his attorneys are hoping this new evidence will help him get a new trial. The victim's family says they are confident the right person is behind bars.
She feels more calm about it. She feels a little better, but a little more sad than before that one of her best friends did.
Well, let's bring in our legal panel today. Tom Caniff, criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor, and Fox News legal analyst, Lise Wheel. All right, Lise, they are going to offer a new hearing.
Yes.
That's not the same as a new trial.
No, it's a hearing to see whether or not he will get a new trial. Getting a new trial is a very high bar to doing that because, of course, every defendant in jail, prison says,
the prisons are full of innocent men.
That. But here they really had a couple of things. One is ineffective assistance of his first defense counsel. Apparently, this defense counsel did not try and go to interview a woman, a girl, at the time who said, I was right there in the local library talking to him at the time he was supposed to be doing the killing. She wrote an affidavit saying that she was there and talked with him. She was never interviewed, okay? And then they also found an expert who said, I testified that the cell phone puts him at the place of the crime, but the prosecution apparently kept from him information that said, these cell phone records really aren't that good. They're a big disclaimer. So you got those two big pieces of evidence that get him this new hearing.
And all of this was collected essentially by the producers of the podcast. I mean, they did a lot of the work that his own defense attorneys apparently should have done the first time around.
True, but you have to be, and believe me, the court is going to be suspicious of this claim that, my attorney didn't do his job. I mean, this individual is doing
She signed an affidavit saying, I never was interviewed.
100 million downloads notwithstanding, I mean,
Right.
does the public interest in this case and the amount of questions that have been raised by the podcast, does that have no bearing on the court?
It has bearing on the court because the idea is, look, the reason why you could file these motions 5 years later, 10 years later, in this case 15 years later, is because the public policy dictates that, look, we don't knowingly keep innocent people in jail, even if they've exhausted their appeals. So there's a two-prong test that he has to satisfy. One, he has to show that there's new evidence, and the motion he's put forth seems to state that. Secondly, he has to show, or the defense team has to show, or the appeals team has to show, that reasonable diligence would not have revealed this evidence. That's where a lot of defendants get caught up, because simply blaming your attorney, say, look, my attorney.
But ineffective assistance of counsel is a remedy for that. That is an excuse, not an excuse, a reason to get a new trial. And then you have the prosecutors who apparently withheld exculpatory information. I mean, as a former prosecutor, there's nothing worse than that.
The prosecutor's not going to concede that was exculpatory.
No, well,
the prosecutor's going to say, look, that was another page of the records.
But the expert on Serial, though, this was where the podcast comes in. The expert on Serial said, if I'd known about that, my testimony would have been different. So Serial got that out of the expert.
And don't you think that the prosecution in this case is going to respond and say, look, your attorney exercising due diligence could have subpoenaed the phone records? That was reasonably discoverable
ineffective
information.
assistance of counsel, but you can't blame the guy for that.
Well, that's the thing, Lisa. I mean, you spent a long time in the legal profession. You've spent a long time here as a journalist and legal analyst. It is pretty common if somebody wants to, O.J. Simpson tried it in his most recent conviction, had a great attorney for his first case, and then throws that attorney under the bus for the appeal. Is that what's going on here?
Very, very common. Of course, that happens all the time. It's almost, malpractice not to do that, and certainly clients do that, and defense lawyers know that that's going to happen. But here, and most times I would say, forget about it. The trial would have been the same. But here, if that information really was withheld, and that expert would not have testified the way he did, and if the lawyers never found a witness who says, I was actually talking with him, I don't know. That's pretty tough to overcome.
But we're talking now 15 years after the original conviction, 17 years, I think, after the original crime. People's memories have changed. Heck, people might have died. Can you still order up a new trial and expect it to be fair, given the passage of time.
Well, and that's part of what the defendants hope in bringing these motions. I mean, the idea is that, look, if they're successful, the judge ordered a hearing. The hearing, they'll call his prior lawyer. They'll question him as to what he did or didn't do. I bet you that he's going to have a story that conflicts, at least in part, from what the defendant is saying regarding the efforts that he put in to uncover witnesses and so forth. If somehow the defendant prevails, then there could be a deal. The DA could say, "Look, we'll let you plead guilty to a lesser charge, or give you time served, or reduced sentence," because it's just not practical to retry this case at this point.
The many questions raised in this podcast suggest that this guy is completely innocent of this woman's murder.
I think the podcast at least raises the question, which is why the judge is looking at this.
Right.
Isn't it amazing, John, though, that this is not the legal system working? This was a podcast raising these questions.
I know. Is summary judgment a possibility? I mean, could the judge just say, "Nah, you've done enough"?
No, not in a criminal case like this. No.
All right.
The remedy on a successful appeal, a lot of people don't realize this, is not that you walk free, but you get a new trial.
Right. And look for Wheel of Justice podcast on FoxNewsRadio.com. I'm investigating crimes just like this.
We'll get you 100 million downloads any day now.
Absolutely.
All right, Lee's Wheel. We'll keep an eye on this case. Thank you, Tom Caniff.
Thanks, John.